Welcome to AFSPA Talks, a production of the American Foreign Service Protective Association. Each month, we deliver informative health and wellness topics you want to know about, so make sure to subscribe to us on your preferred podcast platform. And if you have any questions about content discussed in this episode, ask them at AFSPA Live, our live Q&A session streaming every last Thursday of the month at 11 a.m. Eastern Time on youtube.com/AFSPA Cares. Now here's your host, Chief Executive Officer Kyle Longton.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of AFSPA Talks. I'm Kyle Longton, and with me as always is...
Maddie Norton.
Maddie, how are you doing?
Good. Despite the gloomy weather outside, doing good. What about you?
I'm doing all right. As we're recording this intro, it is, we are looking at a week full of rain here in the Washington, D.C. area.
Under a flood watch.
Yep. I was in Miami last week, actually, for a conference, and I'm headed to Chicago later this week. So I'm not sure how that equals out weather-wise, but anyway, I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to be here with you as we're getting ready for this month's episodes and this month's themes. But before we get to that, I wonder if you can give us a little bit of a preview of some of the other things AFSPA has coming up for members and even potential members for the rest of the month.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you haven't been aware, we've been doing lots of webinars in the past couple of months just to make sure that our members have access to all the things that they could possibly need during these times. And we have one on transitioning successfully into retirement on Tuesday, May 20th. We offered that at 3 different times, so definitely check that out on our afspa.org/events page. Then we'll have AFSPA Live on the 29th at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. So please join for that. We'll be discussing mental health and all the ways that our benefits and services can help you with that. On June 3rd, that's a Tuesday, we'll have healthcare and retirement. Once again, offered at 3 different times with Prudential. And then June 10th, we'll have college funding methods. So if you've got a rising senior or kids at all, that might be a good thing to tune into because college is expensive.
That is very true. I finally finished paying off my college.
Oh wow, congratulations.
It took a while. Anybody who's just listening to this, you don't see the gray perhaps in my hair, but I did pay it off a little while ago, but it was quite a few years after I actually left college. So I'm glad to say that I have kids in elementary school, and we've had 529 accounts for them since birth.
Smart.
Probably should be putting money in them.
Right.
So I'll mark my calendar for that that event. But I think that you mentioned we've got some information coming up about retirement, and I think that's a hot topic right now for federal employees, particularly in across the federal government. I shouldn't say it's particular to the DC area, because anywhere that there's a federal workforce, these questions are coming up, whether it's retirement or just separation from federal service. And that's not our topic for today. That's not our theme for this month. It's what you mentioned before, which is a focus on mental health. And I hate to use the word, but I'm going to use it anyway, uncertainty. The uncertainty that a lot of federal employees and their family members are facing right now has a huge effect, not just on, what does the financial future look like, but also on their current state, their physical health, and particularly their mental health. And we've done a lot in recent years about the interplay between mental health and physical health and mental health and so forth. And it's incredibly important, but it's also critical right now to take some time, regardless of what you're facing, regardless how directly you're impacted by this, to check in with yourself. And to make use of some of those benefits, like you referenced, Maddie, that are available to you, whether you got the Foreign Service Benefit Plan, or if you've got coverage through another federal employer somewhere else. You can look at employee assistance programs. You can look at apps that may be available to help you with self-directed, or even counseling, and whether that's one-on-one group counseling, virtual, in-person, whatever it may be. I really encourage you to take a look at those programs. And as I said, check in with yourself, because these changes, they have implications, whether for where's the next paycheck coming from? How are you going to pay for your kids' college? What's retirement going to look like now? And there's something so many people are grappling with right now. And I guess that the thing that we want to emphasize is that you are not alone, and that these feelings you're having, the uncertainty, the feelings of fear, even anger at times,
Right.
you're not alone. That these feelings are normal.
Hmm.
And we want to give you the support and the tools that we can make available to help you work through those feelings, help you manage them, and stay healthy and healthy to feel better and live better to use our theme for the year, but really, in all honesty, to make sure that you are living your best life, even as circumstances change.
Exactly.
And so we are offering these programs, and we're offering a couple of podcasts this month, as well as AFSPA Live, highlighting some of the programs that we offer. And in particular, with today's episode, we're highlighting some of the support that's available for our members overseas, who are outside the US, and not just um, for enrollees or for adult members, but also for dependents, for children, because we have found through the years that obviously kids are not insulated from the issues that may come up from things that affect whether you're moving from post to post, you're facing a career change, anything like that can affect the whole family. And so we're really glad to have a long-term partnership with a group called the Truman Group. And this partnership goes back almost a decade now. But we wanted to highlight this because it can be a critical resource for people outside the US, and again, for all family members who may be facing this. And so I don't want to delay any longer. Before we introduce our guest, Maddie, is there anything that you want to add that I may have missed?
No, I think you covered it all. I think, especially if you're overseas right now and seeing all the things happening back home in the US, that it can be even more stressful to just not know what's happening and not be home technically. So if you've been struggling with that, this is the perfect episode for you. And yeah, I can't wait to jump into it.
So our guest today, and Maddie, I'll ask you to give the full bio, but I will introduce her, if I may, is one of the providers who works for the Truman Group, and her name is Diane Nickeson-Mendheim. And she was kind enough to join us. I will mention, just for reference, we recorded the episode with her back in April.
Yep.
Maddie and I are recording this intro on May 13th. The intention of posting this for you all on May 19th. So we wanted to see sort of how things were before we put everything together, and things have not necessarily improved for folks. So we just want to make sure you know this resource is available. And Diane is going to tell us more about it. But before we hear from her, Maddie, can you tell us a little bit about Diane?
Of course, yeah. Diane has nearly 20 years of experience helping clients heal pain, release stress, and move forward from adversity, both in the US and abroad. She has lived with her husband, two children, and dogs in a number of countries, including the Philippines, Albania, Slovenia, and Belgium. Diane has a special interest in helping expats adjust to the unique challenges associated with living abroad and extensive experience helping clients find relief from anxiety, heal trauma, and recover from loss. So we can't wait to chat with Diane and all the useful information she has for us.
All right, let's get to it. Diane, welcome to AFSPA Talks. Thank you for joining us.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
So I'm going to start with some basic questions, I think. And the most basic perhaps is, can you tell us some information about the Truman Group? What is it? What do you all do?
Yeah. So we are a psychotherapy practice group. The head office is in Minneapolis, but providers are all over the world, literally all over the world. We've got people in Mongolia as well as Virginia. And our focus is actually meeting the needs of English-speaking expats that are living abroad. The group was founded by Sean Truman and Susan Bernstein. I'm not sure exactly how many years ago, but it was over a decade, at least 15 or something like that. And Sean, an expat kid himself, was particularly interested in meeting the needs of expats because he saw there was a big gap. And since that time, I do think it has filled a major gap. People actually are really glad to be able to meet online. And since COVID, that has become a norm, but
Hmm.
Truman Group still actually has a special focus on the needs of expats. Most of our providers have either they are currently living abroad or they have experience living abroad and understand the unique challenges with this lifestyle.
That's perfect. Very important, especially just knowing that they also have that experience and can be able to relate to whoever they're talking to.
Yeah,
Especially because it can be difficult if whoever you're speaking with doesn't understand what you're going through.
absolutely. Yeah.
All right. What kind of credentials do Truman Group providers have?
So we are all licensed mental health providers. We are licensed in a state in the United States. So typically that's either psychologists, licensed clinical social workers, or marriage and family therapists. Those are the three official credentials that we have. Um, and we've all been trained in the US. So the experience will be just like if you were in the United States, talking to someone in their office or even online too. So same credentials there. We do also have clients though who come from Canada, Australia,
Mm.
places like that too. So it's not limited to just the US.
Makes sense. And appreciate the emphasis that this is exactly like it would be if you were in the US meeting with a provider, even face to face or virtually. And I think I just want to underline the point that you mentioned before with providers all over the world, our members, and it sounds like your all's patients are all around the world. So I assume the answer is yes here, but can Truman providers work with our members to provide care at convenient times, regardless of their time zone?
Yeah, absolutely. So the way the intake process works is you meet with an intake counselor. They You go through about a 30-minute interview. They get an idea of what your needs are, why you're coming for therapy, but also you provide them with like some windows of time. And so then when they're matching you with a provider, they take the best fit for your needs and combine that with the provider's availability. And so because we have providers all over the world, if you need to meet at 7 o'clock Europe time, for example, they will find that best fit of someone who has got special training perhaps in what you're looking for, as well as the time window. So it works out really well.
And then how is the care specifically provided? Are we talking about telephone calls or video visits? Just because I know, especially if you're across the world and trying to get in contact, yeah, how's that work?
Yes. So we use a platform called doxy.com. It's a HIPAA compliant platform. That is our first attempt, and most of the time it works. However, let's say Doxy is not cooperating that day, or the internet's bad, or whatever. We will use then other platforms. So it's not like the session is canceled just because a single platform isn't working properly that day. So I will roll over to a platform called Whereby. If that's not working, I will roll over to a different platform. But Doxy is the first choice. Um, and then as far as communication, it's so the sessions are all video
Mm.
chats. Occasionally, if the internet is real bad, we might, or at least the client might turn off their camera so that it's just an audio call. But typically, it's face-to-face sessions are the most effective. Communication between sessions is typically through email. Um, and then there is no, I think one thing actually to emphasize here is that the Truman Group is not a crisis management
Mm.
practice. It is for ongoing psychological care. So we will refer people if they need more of a crisis intervention, but those are the typical, so email and video calls.
It makes a lot of sense, and I think that we see that in the claims history and just sort of the trends from Foreign Service Benefit Plan members. And one of the other trends that we see is that each year younger members, and I'm talking about children and teens,
Mhm.
tend to utilize care more often than adults. More than half of our mental health dollars that we spent, particularly in the last 3 years, have been for children.
Mhm.
And I'm guess that this is one of the challenges we run into a lot of times is finding providers for children. So guessing
Mhm.
my question, I guess, is can the Truman Group provide care to all ages?
Yes. So the short answer to that is yes, with a minimum age of 10.
Okay.
I will say, though, that that's the published minimum age, but if you have, say, a very articulate 8-year-old and you are posted somewhere where there is no care, we're not going to slam the door in your face. So you and your child will go through an intake process, at which point the intake counselor will assess whether or not they think that this might be an appropriate platform for your child. And even if you're over 10, that's still going to happen, right? So if you are a 10-year-old who can't sit still, video counseling might not be the thing. I will also say that we have some very talented children's counselors who will bend over backwards to make that work. And then it works or it doesn't work in that
Right.
case, right? But let's say let's say video therapy, or let's say telehealth is just not going to work for your child. We will still refer you to the resources that might be more appropriate. And we will also, what often happens is the intake counselors will then suggest to the parent that parent support might be most appropriate.
Hmm.
And I will tell you clinically, with a lot of the things that are going on with kids, things like anxiety or ADHD, parent behavior training or parent behavioral support is actually one of the most evidence-based methods of supporting kids who are dealing with things like that. So it's not even all about the kid getting in front of the screen. It's also about parents too.
I will just say I benefited from some parental support counseling for my at that time my 4-year-olds
Yeah.
when we were dealing with some grief in the family. So it's an incredibly effective way to make me a better it was incredibly to make me a better parent to a child who needed help at that time. So
Mhm.
fully support. I'm glad to know that that's an option.
Absolutely.
Right. And I just want to reiterate again and agree that that is incredible, especially because, therapy doesn't start just from, or it doesn't end from the hour or however long you're in it.
Yeah.
And it's really important to have those coping methods and,
Mhm.
support for the parents so that they can continue to help the child.
Absolutely.
I know you mentioned anxiety and ADHD, but could you provide us a little bit with a sampling of the diagnosis or patient needs that you and your colleagues handle on a regular basis?
Absolutely. So what I will say is that the Truman Group providers are a talented bunch and they can handle a lot of things, right? There are limitations to telehealth, and really it's a question of safety. If the intake counselor does not feel that telehealth is appropriate for either safety reasons or the care needs to be more intense or it's an acute crisis situation, then they will recommend in-person support in some way or another. But as far as diagnoses, the other thing so again, you may be appropriate for telehealth, but also have some complex emotional support needs. Truman Group providers can handle that. When it comes to diagnosing, we don't want to over pathologize and we don't want in other words, we are mindful that AFSPA clients are also have concerns about things like medical clearances and things like that. We're not going to overdiagnose. We're going to find the diagnosis that is the most appropriate. And as you all know, you have to have a diagnosis in order to be reimbursed for care. So does that make sense?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Mhm.
And Diane, I'm going to modify the next question I was going to ask because you've already touched on it. You mentioned Truman Group is sort of designed your all's model is not crisis intervention. It's longer term
Mhm.
counseling. And I'm just curious, and you talked about communication between sessions sort of being by email, but I'm curious, I have a session with somebody from Truman Group. It's 45 minutes or an hour. What am I walking away with from that session in terms of what I should do before our next session? Are there exercises? Are there articles? Are there goals that we're setting in that session? I'm just curious what that model looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it depends on your provider. There are as many models of therapy as there are providers, right? And it is an art. There's a lot of hard science behind it, and there also is an art to counseling. And so a lot of it has to do with your relationship with your provider and where that person is coming from, and their postgraduate training will depend on how much homework they're going to give you. I will also say that I ask people, do you want homework? Because some people are like, nope.
Yeah.
I gotta force it on anybody, right? I mean, the short answer to that is it depends. If the provider is coming from like a cognitive behavioral perspective, then homework is essential to that. And so I will say that assignments will be given in between sessions. If someone is coming from a different kind of training background, for example, I'm trained in EMDR,
Mm.
homework is very optional when it comes to that kind of therapy, partly because the sessions themselves, you're doing a lot of work.
Right.
It's not overwhelming, it's not too much, but it's less about like outside reinforcement and more about healing the wound, if you will,
Right.
in that session. But I will also say that when the Truman Group leadership hires providers, they're not really looking for any specific training or any
Hmm.
specific approach. We have providers that are trained in just about everything. They're looking for good therapists.
Right.
And so if you are looking for something specific, for example, people do sometimes present, I want a CBT therapist, or I want an EMDR therapist, or I want it's called internal family systems. It's trending now, if you will, parts
Okay.
work, right? So people might come with some specific requests, and the intake counselors will definitely meet that need, but they're going to they're going to try to get to know you as best they can in that 30-minute intake, and then they know the providers very well, and they're going to try to match on that level as well, if that makes sense. Because again, it's rapport is the most important
Yeah,
determinant of positive outcomes, if that makes sense.
Okay. Um,
absolutely.
and I too am going to amend my question. But say someone doesn't, they may not get along with their therapist, or there may not be that rapport that you were talking about. Is it easy, or is it possible to switch to a new therapist within the Truman Group, or how's that kind of work?
Absolutely. I mean, it happens.
Right.
Sometimes it's just not a good fit.
Right.
So typically the procedure for that is that the client is asked to talk to their therapist first,
Right.
because it may be that the therapist just needs to know what's not working and can make those adjustments in order to best meet the client's needs. However, if you just don't like your therapist, that is not a deal breaker.
Right.
Then you still talk to the therapist, but then you and the therapist will typically it goes back to the intake counselor for reassignment. So no, it's not hard. If you repeatedly fire your therapists, okay, now it's probably something else going on.
Exactly. Yeah.
So they won't do reassignment like 10 times,
Right.
right? But certainly a couple of times is not even particularly unusual.
Good to know. Good to know. I know we get
Absolutely.
that question sometimes especially in our AFSPA Live, I feel like. So
Yeah,
wanted to ask to clarify
yeah,
for our members.
Yeah,
absolutely.
and you hear that on some other models that are out there. Oh, change any time, and there should be a limit. I think. Yeah,
Right. Yeah.
we need to make
Right,
sure that we're making progress. Yeah.
Hmm.
right,
Um, but I think that also sort of gets into, we've talked a lot about the intake
mhm,
process. What is the wait time that somebody might face? Because this is one of the big challenges, particularly with care in the US, is that
Right.
finding somebody who's accepting new patients,
yeah,
in or out of network, is a challenge. But then also sometimes it may be like, great, I can see you in 3 months for the first time. And so I'm just curious, what's the wait time on for that intake interview, and then maybe even for the first appointment?
right. So the standard answer is 1 to 2 weeks. And so I would say that that's what they aspire to. Sometimes that time's going to be less. Like right now, I think it's about a week.
Okay.
Yeah.
And typically once you get an intake, then you're assigned a therapist. That therapist is expected to offer you an appointment within about 1 week. Sometimes that varies, like maybe it's happening right during like spring break, for example, is coming up and people aren't around, or taking that week off or something like
Hmm.
that. But typically that's the expectation, is that if you have opened your window of availability, you offer a client a session within about 1 week. And then the intake might or might not take about a week to schedule. So 1 to 2 weeks.
Okay.
Um, During really, really busy times, that can't be guaranteed. I know that since COVID, the intake team has really worked to kind of fix the bugs.
Right.
And so that people aren't waiting more than a week or two. That's the aspiration. And they're very, very conscious of this being not something we want to do. We don't want to keep people waiting.
Right.
And I will say too that, in even just locally in Virginia, you're right, it's not uncommon to, first of all, to have to wait a long time for a therapist, and also to get somebody who's like a pre-licensed, if you will.
Hmm.
That being the people that you can see within a couple of weeks. And
Yeah.
so Truman Group providers, they do have a fellowship program, but other than the fellows that we have, all Truman Group providers have a minimum of 5 years post licensure experience. So graduate school, however long it takes, depending on your license, to get that license, which is a minimum of 2 years and more, I think, for some licenses, and then 5 years after that. So you're going to get someone with some experience.
That's excellent.
That is, I will say that I know back in my hometown, it was like 2 months, 3 months to be able to see someone. And I'm sure there's longer times for others, especially in more rural communities.
Mhm.
So that is incredible to hear. I think that's great. Um, and then finally, how can our listeners learn more about the Truman Group, or even how can they inquire about treatment?
Yeah, absolutely. So the website has a ton of information, and I'm pretty sure it has a button somewhere on there where you can like book
Right.
and take a visit. You can also send an email to inquiries@trumangroup.com. But some other good sources of information actually are the people. So let's say you're at Post and you want to learn more about Truman Group. We have strong relationships with the school counselors. So the International School Counselor Community, Office of Overseas Schools, RMOPs. So if you don't get everything you need from the website, ask one of those people. So ask your healthcare provider at the health unit. You can ask your kid's school counselor, and people like that. They might be able to actually have some non-website based information or some personal experience even.
Yeah. I think that's very true. That's how, we first learned about the Truman Group, was actually through Med and through some of our members saying, "Hey, this is great. What can we do? How can we get it covered?" So I think that's fantastic, and I'm glad to know that people are also open to sharing this. And I think that's something else that's come in recent years, that medical clearance concerns aside, that it is less taboo to talk about, seeking help when you need it.
Absolutely.
So, and Diane, I'll just ask you, this has been great and I think very informative for our members, for our listeners. Before we wrap up, though, is there anything else that you'd like to add about the Truman Group or the work that you all do?
Yeah. So one thing I will say, that my colleague Lisa is trying to get together a repatriation support group for teenagers who are coming back to the US this spring. It's a rough reentry. I will say that even from personal experience. I have a 10-year-old and a 13-year-old, and it's under normal circumstances, it's a difficult process. And the kids coming back into the States right now may have not anticipated that. So this group, I don't have any details about that, but I know that that's something that's on the horizon. And Lisa is amazing. So hopefully more details about that will be available soon.
And if you have them, share them. We'll get them out to our members as best we can for anybody who might benefit from that.
Excellent.
Um, so Diane, thank you so much for joining us today and for
Mhm.
sharing this information. And a sincere thank you to you and all of your colleagues at the Truman Group for the great care that you provide to our members around the world. Thank you.
You're welcome. And thank you for everything you all do too.
Thanks again to Diane for joining us for today's episode. For more information about the Truman Group, please visit trumangroup.com. For Foreign Service Benefit Plan members, please note that there is no direct billing between the Truman Group and the Foreign Service Benefit Plan. Members will have to pay upfront to the Truman Group and then file for reimbursement to the Foreign Service Benefit Plan. Please include the full itemized invoice and not just the receipt of payment for any claims you're submitting to FSBP. For more information about the Truman Group, please visit trumangroup.com. Foreign Service Benefit Plan members should note that there is no direct billing relationship between the Truman Group and the Foreign Service Benefit Plan. Members will pay the Truman Group for the services and then seek reimbursement from FSBP. When doing so, please submit a full itemized invoice as well as proof of payment when submitting to the plan for reimbursement. Claims from the Truman Group are reimbursed at in-network rates. This has been AFSPA Talks, a production of the American Foreign Service Protective Association. All information offered in this podcast is meant to be educational. The views expressed by the hosts and guests are their own and do not necessarily represent AFSPA. Should there be any discrepancy between information offered in the podcast and official plan documents for the Foreign Service Benefit Plan or the other products offered by AFSPA, the policy provisions will prevail. Thanks for listening, and be sure to subscribe to AFSPA Talks to catch our next episode. Please rate and review us on your favorite podcast app and share feedback with us on Facebook, Instagram, or LinkedIn. We'll talk again soon.